Your rebellion ends here, Kenobi. The Republic has fallen, Mace. Justice demands your surrender. I fight for what's right, then fall, never!
Leaders of Earth, a grave threat emerges from the stars. Ancient prophecies foretell a cataclysm. You must unite. Deploy your defenses. The fate of all worlds is at stake. Understood. Mobilizing. The Republic is mobilizing. We must act now. Let them come. They will find only ruin. Your arrogance will be our undoing. It is your fear that blinds you.
You know what makes this crossover dangerous? It's the fact that one man looked at the entire Republic, looked at the Jedi Order, looked at the systems everybody blindly trusted, and said, something is deeply wrong here. And the scary part is that he was right. This story asks a question most Star Wars timelines avoid. What happens when the Jedi stop protecting institutions and start protecting truth? Once Count Dooku starts pulling on that thread, you'll love it. Let's get into it.
The Count's Gambit. The Jedi Code demanded detachment. Count Dooku chose attachment to truth instead. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi had served the Galactic Republic as guardians of peace and justice. They prided themselves on objectivity, on seeing beyond personal bias, on serving the greater good rather than individual interests. But what happens when institutional loyalty becomes blindness? When devotion to democracy prevents you from seeing its corruption? Count Dooku of Serenno, Jedi Master, diplomat, warrior, stood at a crossroads that would define galactic history. He had just lost his Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, to a Sith Lord who shouldn't have existed. He had watched the Republic Senate fail Nabo, while corporations profited from suffering. And he had been approached by the new Supreme Chancellor with an offer that confirmed his worst suspicions about how deep the rot truly went. One conversation, one choice, one chance to prevent galactic genocide before the Sith won. Most stories tell you Dooku fell to the dark side, became Darth Tyrannus, and helped orchestrate the Clone Wars as Palpatine's apprentice. But what if the most dangerous man in the galaxy wasn't Palpatine, but the Jedi who refused to fall? What if Dooku stayed in the light, but still left the Order? What if he built his own coalition, not of Sith and corporations, but of Jedi, senators, and worlds who saw the Republic's corruption and chose principle over politics? This is the story of how a Count became a revolutionary, a slave boy became a statesman, and the Clone Wars ended before they began. If you have specific characters in another universe you will love to see enter into the Star Wars universe, tap the like button in this video and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. More beautiful stories await. Count Dooku stood in the private office of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, a hidden recording device concealed beneath his Jedi robes, and listened to the most powerful man in the galaxy reveal himself as the Republic's greatest enemy. You've seen it, haven't you? Palpatine said, his voice carrying none of the grandfatherly warmth he displayed publicly. The corruption, the decay, the Senate arguing over committee assignments while worlds burn. You and I, Master Dooku, we could change that. Together. Dooku's hand rested near his lightsaber, not in threat, but in readiness. The Force whispered warnings that made his skin crawl. Darkness so profound it felt like standing at the edge of an abyss. You're suggesting what? Exactly, Chancellor? Palpatine smiled. I'm suggesting we stop pretending the Republic can be saved through its own systems. Democracy has failed. The Jedi have become politicians playing at philosophy. But you understand that real change requires real power. He paused, yellow eyes gleaming. Join me. Become my apprentice. Together we'll bring order to the galaxy. For 3 seconds, Dooku considered it. Not because he was tempted by the dark side, but because the diagnosis was correct even if the prescription was poison. The Republic was failing. The Jedi were blind. Democracy without accountability was tyranny with better marketing. But replacing one Sith Empire with another wasn't the answer. I'm sorry, Chancellor, Dooku said carefully, his voice carrying absolute certainty. But I won't replace one tyranny with another. If the Republic is broken, the solution isn't dictatorship, it's building something better. Palpatine's expression shifted from invitation to calculation. I see. And you believe the Jedi Council will listen to your concerns? that they'll investigate a supreme chancellor based on the word of a master grieving his Padawan's death. I believe, Dooku replied, that truth has a way of revealing itself, with or without institutional support. He turned to leave, the recording device capturing every word, knowing that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The Council was too invested in the Republic, too attached to their role as guardians of a system they'd stopped questioning centuries ago. He'd need more than proof. He'd need an alternative, a coalition powerful enough to challenge both the Republic's corruption and the Sith's manipulation. He'd need to build it outside the Order entirely. 3 hours later, Dooku found Anakin Skywalker huddled in a temple corridor, crying. The boy was 9 years old, recently freed from slavery, mourning the Jedi who'd promised him a better life and died keeping that promise. He'd been told his emotions were dangerous, that attachment led to the dark side, that he should simply release his grief into the Force and move on. He was, predictably, a mess. Dooku knelt to the boy's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Who are you?" Anakin looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Nobody important. I doubt that very much. My name is Dooku, Count of Sereno and Master of the Jedi Council. Though I suppose I should say former member." He studied the boy carefully. "I think you'll find we have much in common. We were both born at the wrong time. You as a slave when slavery should have ended millennia ago, and I as a Jedi when the Order forgot what it means to actually help people." "Master Kagan helped people," Anakin said quietly. "He freed me, told me I could be a Jedi. He did, and he was right. But tell me, young Skywalker, did freeing you feel like following the Jedi Code, or like breaking it?" Anakin frowned, thinking. Master Kagan said he was doing what was right, even if the Council wouldn't approve. He said sometimes rules get in the way of helping people. Kagan was my Padawan. I taught him that lesson. Dooku's voice carried both pride and sadness. The Council didn't always approve of his methods. They won't approve of mine either. But I'm going to train you anyway, if you're willing. Not to be a Jedi who serves the Republic blindly, but to be someone who serves truth, even when it's inconvenient. Master Obi-Wan said he'd train me, and he will, if that's what you choose. But I can offer you something the Temple can't. Honesty about how broken the galaxy is, and the tools to actually fix it instead of maintaining the status quo. He paused. But I should warn you, people like Senator Palpatine will take an interest in you. When powerful men say they're watching your career with great interest, what they really mean is they see you as a useful tool. Everything they say, every compliment, every piece of advice will be designed to manipulate you. I can teach you how to tell the difference." Anakin wiped his eyes, studying Dooku with the instinctive distrust of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. "How do I know you're not trying to use me too?" "You don't. That's why you should trust your instincts, not my words." "What does your gut tell you about me?" The boy tilted his head, really looking at Dooku for the first time. The man was old, rich, powerful, but there was something safe about his presence, like a fortress built to protect rather than conquer. "I trust you. Then I'll teach you, if Master Kenobi permits it. But understand, I will be fair, but I will be strict. I expect excellence, not because you're the chosen one, but because you're capable of it. And the first lesson starts immediately." He stood, offering his hand. "Gulme, we're going to see a friend of yours." Naboo had begun recovering from the Trade Federation blockade, but the scars remained visible. Refugee camps still dotted the countryside. Supply lines struggled to meet demand. The Republic's promised aid had been delayed in committee, again, while senators argued over jurisdiction and funding allocations. Queen Amidala received Dooku and Anakin in the palace dining hall, her political mask firmly in place, even as she gave Anakin a warm smile that made the boy blush. Dooku noted the interaction with interest, but said nothing, instead focusing on the woman who represented everything the Republic should have been and wasn't. "Count Dooku," Padme said formally. "Thank you for coming. Though I confess I'm curious what brings a Jedi Master to Naboo so soon after." "Everything. Honesty," Dooku replied simply, and an acknowledgement of failure. "The Republic failed you, Your Majesty. The Jedi failed you. And I suspect you've realized that waiting for corrupt institutions to suddenly develop integrity is a losing strategy. Padme's diplomatic smile tightened. The Republic has its flaws, but nothing. Trade Federation blockades your planet. Republic stands by and does nothing. You call vote of no confidence. New chancellor elected. And what happens? Federation occupation continues while your people die because the new chancellor tells you circumstances beyond his control prevent intervention. Dooku's voice carried aristocratic contempt. You were played, Your Majesty. The entire crisis was manufactured to put Palpatine in power. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. The blockade, the invasion, even the vote itself, all orchestrated. And the proof is simple. Who benefited most? Not you. Not Naboo. Not the Republic. Only Palpatine. Padme set down her fork, her young face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd led a planet through war before her 20th birthday. Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, what's the alternative? The Republic is all we have. Is it? Dooku gestured out the window toward the reconstruction efforts. Democracy didn't save Naboo. You did. The Gungans did. 2 Jedi working outside the system did. The iron and blood of your people defending themselves did. Not Senate debates. Not Republic aid that never came. You. He leaned forward, voice carrying the weight of centuries of aristocratic authority. Long before Naboo was part of the Republic, it was an absolute monarchy. Perhaps it must become one again, not because monarchy is inherently superior, but because your leadership saved your people when democracy abandoned them. You're suggesting tyranny. I'm suggesting that systems are only as good as the people running them. A monarchy is the best form of government until a mad king sits on the Iron Throne. A republic is the best form of government until it falls prey to the interests of greed and decadence. And you know that's exactly what's happened. We both do. Padme stared out at the lake, watching swans glide across crystalline waters, and Dooku saw the moment her resolve crystallized. What if I told you, he continued quietly, that the Republic is now under the control of a Dark Lord of the Sith? That the very man who orchestrated your planet's suffering is sitting in the Chancellor's office right now? Senator Palpatine, Padme's voice carried disbelief. He did. He manufactured the crisis, positioned his agents to ensure your vote would succeed, then used his new authority to consolidate power while appearing helpless to actually help you. I have evidence. Not enough to convince the Senate. He controls too much already, but enough for anyone willing to see the pattern. Then show the Jedi Council. I will, but they won't act. They're too invested in the Republic, too attached to their role as guardians of a system they've stopped questioning. Which is why I'm leaving the Order. Why I'm building something new. A coalition of worlds that respect sovereignty, reject corporate influence, and defend each other from threats the Republic ignores. He studied her carefully. You want freedom for your people. I want to free the galaxy from a Sith. Our causes have more in common than you think. Padme thought for a long moment, political calculation warring with idealism, until finally she met his eyes. Okay, you have an ally, but I'll be watching to make sure you practice what you preach. As they continued discussing specifics over dinner, Dooku couldn't help but notice Anakin couldn't keep his eyes off the Queen. He filed that observation away for future consideration. The boy had feelings, real or merely youthful infatuation remained to be seen. But either way, it presented opportunities. Young Skywalker, Dooku said as they prepared to leave, you've been unusually quiet. I was just thinking, Anakin replied, about what you said, about powerful people using others. Queen Amidala saved her people, but the Senate keeps delaying aid. That's not right. No, it isn't, which is why we're going to change it. He turned to Padme. Your Majesty, I have a proposal. Would you consider serving as Anakin's tutor in diplomacy and governance? I can teach him philosophy and combat, but you can teach him something equally vital, how to lead people instead of simply commanding them. Padme smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her political mask. I'd be honored, though I should warn you, I expect my students to work as hard as I do. Anakin's face lit up in a way Dooku hadn't seen since they'd met. "I promise I'll work hard." As they departed Naboo, Dooku made one more critical decision. He contacted a network of bounty hunters with a simple contract. Find Shmi Skywalker on Tatooine, purchase her freedom by any means necessary, and bring her safely to Sereno as an honored guest. The Jedi taught that attachments led to the dark side. Dooku had a different philosophy. Abandoning family was the true darkness. And if he was going to train Anakin properly, the boy needed to know his mother was safe and free. The Jedi Council chamber felt colder than usual when Dooku presented his findings. Holographic evidence displayed across the center. Financial records showing the banking clan funded both the Trade Federation and the opposition to Chancellor Valorum. Communication intercepts suggesting coordination between Naboo's blockade and Palpatine's political rise. Circumstantial but damning patterns that any investigator would recognize as signs of manufactured crisis. "Your concerns are noted, Master Dooku," Mace Windu said with diplomatic restraint that couldn't quite hide his skepticism. But accusing a sitting Supreme Chancellor of being a Sith Lord based on financial patterns and suspicious timing is unprecedented. So, is a Supreme Chancellor's rise to power coinciding perfectly with a military crisis that benefits him politically? Dooku countered. The evidence may be circumstantial, but the pattern is clear. Someone orchestrated the Naboo blockade to create political opportunity. Hattans John Mistad, Kikadijmundi intergested. Your grief over Qui-Gon's death may be causing you to see conspiracy where there's merely incompetence and corruption. Serious, yes, but not necessarily Sith manipulation. Yoda studied Dooku with ancient eyes that had seen 9 centuries of galactic politics. Investigate these claims, we will, but proof absolute, we require. Accuse the Chancellor wrongly and destroyed the Jedi's credibility will be. Then investigate properly, Dooku urged. Not through Senate channels Palpatine controls, but independently. Use your authority as Jedi to examine his background, his rise to power, his associates. Mace nodded slowly. We'll form an investigation team. Discreetly. If there's truth to your concerns, we'll find it. But Master Dooku, his tone hardened, you must trust the process. Trust the Council to handle this appropriately. I trust the Council's intentions, Dooku replied carefully. I question whether the institution you're serving deserves that trust anymore. The investigation took 3 months and ultimately satisfied no one. Mace's team found circumstantial evidence, suspicious patterns, and connections that raise questions, but nothing definitive enough to accuse a Supreme Chancellor of treason. The Senate, predictably, blocked deeper inquiry, citing separation of powers and democratic norms. The philosophical fracture within the Council deepened. Mace's position crystallized. The Jedi serve the Republic. We are guardians, not judges. If we start acting outside democratic institutions based on suspicion rather than proof, we become vigilantes, no better than the Sith we're supposed to oppose. Dooku's counter. When democratic institutions are corrupted from within, waiting for them to investigate themselves is complicity. The Jedi must be willing to act independently when justice demands it, or we're just decorative enforcers for whatever government happens to be in power. Yoda's attempt at compromise. Troubling, Master Dooku's findings are. But prove Sith control we cannot. Patience we must have. Watch closely we will. Act rashly we must not. But patience, Dooku knew, was exactly what the Sith wanted. Then I'm leaving, Dooku announced to the Council. Not in anger, not to join the dark side, but because I cannot serve an order that values institutional loyalty over truth. You would abandon everything Qui-Gon believed? Mace demanded. Qui-Gon believed in helping people the institutions ignored. He believed in questioning authority when authority was wrong. He believed in the will of the Force over the will of the Senate. Dooku's voice carried absolute certainty. I'm honoring his memory by doing exactly what he taught me. Following my conscience instead of following orders. He turned to leave, then paused. And I'm taking Anakin Skywalker with me. Obi-Wan has agreed. The boy needs training the temple cannot provide. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in the gallery, conflicted but accepting. He'd investigated independently and found enough to deeply disturb him, even if he wasn't ready to leave the Order over it. Train him well, Master. Qui-Gon trusted you. So do I. Dooku left the temple that day, with Anakin at his side, several Jedi, sympathetic to his position, quietly expressing support, and no violence exchanged. Just a clean philosophical divorce between a man who refused to compromise truth and an order that couldn't afford to challenge the government it served. The galaxy watched. The Republic media called him a fallen Jedi, forming a dangerous coalition. Outer Rim world saw him as someone finally standing up to core corruption. And Palpatine, publicly expressing concern for his old friend while privately seething with Sith fury, recognized he'd just lost control of a critical variable. 3 years passed. The Confederacy of Independent Systems grew to 18 worlds, not through conquest, but through invitation. Planets tired of Senate corruption, corporate exploitation, and Republic indifference joined voluntarily, forming a government that respected sovereignty rather than demanding submission. Dooku trained Anakin on Sereno while Padme tutored him on Naboo. Shmi Skywalker, freed from slavery and brought to civilized space, became an advisor on abolitionist policy and refugee rights within the CS government. The boy who'd been property learned diplomacy from a queen, strategy from a count, and compassion from a mother who'd survived hell and chose to help others escape it. And then the clone army became public knowledge. Dooku stood in the CS Council chamber, watching holographic footage of endless ranks of white-armored soldiers, and knew with absolute certainty that the war Palpatine had been planning was about to begin. Intelligence reports Republic military buildup along our borders, his tactical advisor reported. Concentration suggests offensive operations planned within months. Then we prepare, Dooku replied. Not for conquest, for defense. Alert all member worlds. Begin militia recruitment. And someone contact General Coda. We're going to need his expertise in training citizen soldiers very quickly. Anakin, now 12 years old and far more mature than chronological age suggested, frowned at the tactical display. Master, if they're building an army of clones, people bred specifically to fight and die, doesn't that prove you were right? About the Republic being corrupted? Yes, Dooku said quietly. But being right provides cold comfort when millions are about to die, proving it. The Clone Wars were coming. But this time, Count Dooku would fight them from the light side. The Jedi fracture. The discovery of the clone army on Kamino should have been a moment of galactic unity. Instead, it became the catalyst for the Jedi Order's most profound schism in 1,000 years. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood before the Jedi Council, presenting evidence that should have alarmed everyone. A secret army of 3 million soldiers, grown from stolen DNA, commissioned by a dead Jedi Master using funds whose origin no one could trace, ready for deployment at precisely the moment the Republic faced its greatest threat. Convenient, Mace Windu said, though his voice carried uncertainty rather than confidence. Almost too convenient. Exactly my concern, Master Windu, Obi-Wan replied carefully. He'd spent 3 years investigating Dooku's warnings, and every lead pointed toward the same disturbing conclusion. Someone had been planning this war for decades. We should question why this army exists. Who truly commissioned it? What purpose it's meant to serve? The purpose is clear, Ki-Adi-Mundi interjected. The Confederacy grows stronger every month. Dooku's coalition now controls key hyperspace routes and industrial systems. If war comes, and it will, the Republic needs military capability to defend itself. Defend against what? PLO Kuhn's voice carried philosophical weight. 18 worlds that chose independence democratically? Systems tired of Senate corruption exercising their sovereign right to self-governance? When did the Jedi become enforcers for a government that's lost its moral authority? The council chamber fell silent. The question everyone had been avoiding for 3 years had finally been spoken aloud. Yoda's ears drooped with profound sadness. Divided, the council has become. Divided, The Order may follow. Speak plainly, we must. Vote, we shall. Mace stood, his voice carrying absolute conviction. The Republic is imperfect, but it's the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The Separatists, regardless of Dooku's stated intentions, represent fracture, division, the kind of instability that invites darkness. If the Senate offers us this army, we must accept it. The alternative is watching the galaxy tear itself apart while we debate philosophy. The alternative, PLO, Kuhn countered, rising to face him, is recognizing that accepting an army of slaves, because that's what they are, beings created specifically to fight and die, represents a betrayal of everything the Jedi claim to stand for. How can we be guardians of peace and justice while commanding soldiers who never had a choice about their existence? They're bred for combat, Count argued. It's not slavery if they're designed for military service. That's exactly what slavers say, Shakti replied quietly, her voice cutting through the debate like a blade. That some beings are naturally suited for servitude, that their purpose justifies their bondage. We're Jedi. We're supposed to know better. Kit Fisto spoke next, his typically jovial demeanor replaced by grim determination. Master Dooku warned us 3 years ago that the Republic was being manipulated toward war. We investigated and found evidence supporting his claims, but dismissed it as inconclusive. Now an army appears exactly when needed, commissioned under suspicious circumstances, and we're debating whether to accept it without questioning who's really pulling the strings. Aayla Secura added her voice. If we become generals commanding clone armies, we're no longer peacekeepers. We're military commanders serving government interests. That's not what the Jedi are supposed to be. Luminara Unduli, usually a voice of tradition, surprised everyone by siding with the dissenters. The Force whispers warnings. This path leads to darkness, not for individuals, but for the Order itself. We must refuse. The vote was called. 7-5 in favor of accepting the clone army as the Republic's military force. 7 masters, Mace Windu, Kiadamundi, C.C. Tyan, Aegon Kohler, Coleman Kaj, Oppo Rancisis, and even Peel, voted to serve as Republic generals. 5 masters, PLO Kuhn, Kit Fisto, Shakti, Luminara Unduli, and Aayla Secura, voted against militarization. Yoda abstained, his ancient face heavy with the knowledge that regardless of his choice, the Order would fracture. Then it's decided. Mace said, his voice carrying the weight of command. The Jedi will accept military commissions. We'll lead the clone army in defense of the Republic. No, Plokon replied quietly. You will lead the clone army. We will not. The 5 dissenting masters stood together, facing the council they'd served for decades. Shakti spoke for them all. We request leave from the Order, not to join the dark side, not to betray our principles, but to honor them by refusing to compromise them for political convenience. This is desertion, Aegon Kohler said sharply. This is conscience, PLO Kuhn corrected. The council votes to militarize the Order, to accept an army of beings bred for war, to serve as generals in a conflict we don't fully understand against an enemy that chose independence democratically. We cannot participate in that. We won't. Where will you go? Yoda asked softly. The 5 masters exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility, prepared for it, hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but recognized it might be inevitable. The Confederacy, Kit Fisto replied. Dooku's coalition has offered sanctuary to Jedi who oppose militarization. They're forming what they call the Jedi Covenant. Protectors, not generals. Peacekeepers operating independently rather than as Republic assets. You would join Dooku? Mace's voice carried betrayal and fury in equal measure. Abandon the Order for a fallen Jedi's rebellion? Dooku hasn't fallen, Aayla said firmly. He left because he saw what we're only now beginning to recognize, that the Republic has corrupted the Order by making us servants of the state rather than servants of the Force. He was right, Master Windu, about all of it. This is treason. This is principle, Luminara replied with Jedi calm. The kind of principle that says some compromises cost more than any tactical advantage they provide. You're choosing the Republic over the Force. We're choosing the Force over the Republic. History will judge which decision was wiser. The five masters left the temple that day with their Padawans, including an 11-year-old Togruta girl named Ahsoka Tano, whose master had asked her to choose for herself rather than dictating her path. She'd chosen principle over politics, the Force over the Republic, and a future where being a Jedi didn't mean commanding slaves. The galaxy watched the Jedi Order fracture, and opinions divided as sharply as the Council had. Republic media portrayed the dissenting Jedi as traitors seduced by Dooku's manipulation. Holonet commentators debated whether allowing Jedi to join the Separatists represented freedom of conscience or dangerous sedition. But in the Outer Rim, on worlds the Republic had forgotten and the Senate ignored, people saw something different. Jedi who'd chosen principle over power, conscience over convenience, and the courage to stand against their own institution when it betrayed its values. Coruscant Senate chamber buzzed with emergency session energy as Chancellor Palpatine addressed the crisis with carefully calculated concern. "My fellow senators," he began, his voice carrying grandfatherly sadness. "We face an unprecedented crisis. The Jedi Order, guardians we've relied upon for 1,000 years, has fractured. 5 masters, dozens of knights, and hundreds of Padawans have abandoned the Republic to join Count Dooku's Separatist coalition." He paused, allowing shock and anger to ripple through the chamber. "This tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. The Confederacy is no longer merely a political movement seeking reform. It has become a military threat, now reinforced by rogue Jedi who've abandoned their sacred duty to protect democracy." Senator Bale, organist, stood, his voice carrying principled opposition. "Chancellor, with respect, these Jedi didn't abandon democracy. They refused to command an army of beings bred for war. That's not treason. That's conscience. Conscience that conveniently aligns with separatist interests." Another senator shot back.
Nah, this part right here is actually insane when you think about it. Because for the first time in Star Wars history, the Jedi aren't splitting over power. They're splitting over morality. That changes everything. Some Jedi are basically saying, yeah, the Republic is flawed, but we protect it anyway. And the others are saying, if protecting the Republic means commanding slave armies and ignoring corruption, then maybe the Republic deserves to fall. Well, let's get back to the story.
How long before these principled Jedi lead attacks against Republic worlds? The debate raged for hours, but Palpatine had already secured the votes he needed through years of careful manipulation. By session's end, emergency powers had been granted. Not dictatorial authority yet, but enough to activate the clone army officially and position Jedi Council members as military commanders. The Republic Defense Force was born, and with it, the machinery of war began its inevitable march. In his private office afterward, Palpatine allowed himself a moment of Sith satisfaction. Events weren't unfolding exactly as planned. Dooku's defection to the light side had been an annoying variable, but the essential outcome remained achievable. The Jedi were militarizing. The Separatists were growing stronger. And when the time came, Order 66 would eliminate both factions simultaneously. All he needed was the right catalyst to start the war properly. The Confederacy of Independent Systems had grown from 18 worlds to 31 in 3 years, and the arrival of 5 Jedi Masters accelerated that growth exponentially. On Sereno, Count Dooku welcomed them formally in a ceremony that deliberately avoided Republic protocol in favor of something simpler and more profound. "You've given up much to be here," Dooku said, addressing the assembled masters, knights, and Padawans who'd chosen conscience over institutional loyalty. Rank, resources, the security of tradition. Some would call you traitors. The Republic certainly will. But I see something different. Jedi who remembered what being a Jedi actually means. PLO Kuhn stepped forward as their spokesperson. "We don't seek to replace one government with another, Count Dooku. We seek to serve the Force without being bound by political allegiance to institutions that have lost their way." What role would we have in your Confederacy? Whatever role you choose, Dooku replied. The CIS doesn't command Jedi. We don't deploy you as military assets or political tools. You're welcome to form your own organization within the Confederacy, what you're calling the Jedi Covenant, operating independently while coordinating with our defensive forces when your principles align with our needs. Defensive forces? Kit Fisto asked, a hint of his characteristic humor returning. Not an army. We're building one, Dooku admitted, but not through slavery. General Ram Koda is training volunteer militia forces recruited from member worlds. Citizens who choose military service rather than beings bred for it. It's slower, more expensive, and tactically less efficient than a clone army. But it's ethical. A veteran Jedi Knight stepped forward. Older than most, scarred from countless battles before the Jedi had forgotten they were warriors. His name was Ram Koda, and he'd resigned from the Order 2 years earlier after becoming disgusted with temple politics. Militia training takes 6 months to produce soldiers who can match clone competency, Koda said bluntly. We don't have a Republic's resources or their military-industrial complex. What we have is motivation, people defending their homes, their families, their freedom to live outside Republic control. That counts for more than genetic engineering. Shakti studied him carefully. You've been preparing for war. We've been preparing for survival, Koda corrected. Dooku warned 3 years ago that the Sith were manipulating both sides toward conflict. The Republic chose to ignore that warning and build a slave army. We chose to believe it and build something ethical instead. Over the following weeks, the former Republic Jedi integrated into CIS society in ways that surprised many of them. They weren't given military ranks or government positions. Instead, they became what Jedi had been before they'd bound themselves to the Republic. Independent peacekeepers, mediators, protectors operating according to Force guidance rather than political directive. Ahsoka Tano, at 11 years old, found herself studying under multiple masters rather than being bound to a single one. PLO Kun taught her combat. Shakti Totia meditation. And to everyone's surprise, Anakin Skywalker, now 15 years old and having spent 3 years as Dooku's apprentice, taught her practical philosophy. Master Dooku says the Jedi Code is supposed to be a guide, not a prison, Anakin explained during one of their sessions in Sereno's Gardens. The temple taught that emotions are dangerous. Master Dooku teaches that suppressing emotions is dangerous. Feel them, understand them, but don't let them control you. That sounds... Ahsoka paused, searching for the right word. Heretical, Anakin supplied with a grin. I was going to say honest, but yeah, heretical works too. Their training continued while the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the spark that would ignite war. Obi-Wan Kenobi had remained with the Republic Jedi, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to stop investigating. 3 years of careful inquiry had produced a dossier that should have been brought before the Council. Except the Council was now split between those serving as military generals and those who'd left for the Confederacy. He brought it to Mace Windu privately instead. Master Windu. Obi-Wan began carefully in Mace's quarters. I need to show you something. 3 years of investigation into Dooku's claims about Palpatine. Mace's expression hardened. Obi-Wan, we've been through this. The Council investigated and found insufficient evidence. The Council investigated 3 years ago and was blocked by Senate protocols. I've been investigating independently since then. And Master, Obi-Wan activated his datapad, displaying communication intercepts, financial records, and behavioral analysis. Dooku was right. About all of it. Palpatine is Darth Sidious. For 5 minutes, Mace reviewed the evidence in silence. When he finally looked up, his face carried a conflict that would have been impossible to imagine in the Jedi Master, who'd once embodied perfect discipline. If this is accurate, and I'm not saying it is, but if, then we're serving a Sith Lord, leading an army commissioned by our enemy, fighting against Jedi who saw the truth before we did. Yes, and you want me to do what? Arrest the Supreme Chancellor on evidence we've gathered illegally? Trigger a constitutional crisis that could lead to civil war. I want you to acknowledge that Dooku was right. Obi-Wan said quietly that the Jedi who left weren't traitors. They were the ones who kept their integrity, and that we need to find a way to oppose Palpatine without destroying the Republic in the process. Mace was silent for a long moment. We need irrefutable proof, not intercepts and financial patterns, but evidence so overwhelming that the Senate has no choice but to act. Until then, he paused, the weight of command settling over him. We watch. We gather more intelligence, and we prepare for the possibility that when the truth comes out, it will shatter everything. And if war starts before we can expose him, then we serve as Republic generals while investigating our supreme commander. It's not ideal, Obi-Wan. It might even be impossible, but it's the only path I see that doesn't guarantee galactic civil war. What neither Jedi knew was that Palpatine's agents had detected Obi-Wan's investigation months ago. The Sith Lord had allowed it to continue, curious to see if Kenobi would present evidence to the Council or act independently. Now, he had his answer. The Jedi would try to work within the system even while investigating its corruption, which meant they could be manipulated through that very loyalty. Palpatine summoned Mace Windu to his office the following week for a private conversation that seemed routine but was anything but. Master Windu, Palpatine began with apparent sadness. I want to thank you for your continued service during these difficult times. The Order's split has wounded me deeply. Some of those Jedi were friends, as they were to us, Chancellor. I know Count Dooku has been spreading accusations, claiming I'm somehow responsible for the Republic's corruption, that I orchestrated the Naboo crisis for political gain. He sighed heavily. It's painful to be accused by someone I once considered an ally. I hope you know that I've always acted in the Republic's best interests. Of course, Chancellor, I worry, Palpatine continued carefully, that some Jedi might be sympathetic to Dooku's perspective, that his poisonous philosophy might spread even within those who remained loyal. If you ever suspect anyone in the Order is wavering, I trust you'll inform me. It was masterfully done, planting suspicion, encouraging surveillance, positioning Mace as his ally against internal threats. And Mace, despite his investigation with Obi-Wan, felt the subtle manipulation take root, because loyalty to the Republic and loyalty to the Chancellor had become conflated in ways the Jedi had never adequately separated. I'll remain vigilant, Mace promised, unaware he'd just agreed to spy on his own colleague for the Sith Lord they were investigating. The catalyst for war came from an unexpected source, Umbera. The neutral world sat at a strategic hyperspace junction connecting the Inner Rim to major Outer Rim territories. Both the Republic and Confederacy had courted Umbera's government diplomatically, each seeking alliance without forcing the issue. Then intelligence reports began circulating, whispered at first, then louder, that Confederacy agents were operating on Umbera, that a formal alliance was imminent, that if the planet aligned with the Separatists, the Republic would lose control of a critical military corridor. Pong Krell, a Jedi general commanding clone forces near Umbaran space, received direct orders from the Chancellor's office. Secure Umbera before the Separatists do. Any means necessary. Krell was a basilisk whose philosophy aligned perfectly with Mace's. Unquestioning loyalty to the Republic, absolute commitment to victory, and no patience for philosophical hand-wringing about methods. He viewed the clone soldiers as tools rather than people, the Separatists as traitors rather than political opposition, and the Jedi Covenant as dangerous heretics who'd abandoned their duty. He was exactly the kind of Jedi Palpatine needed for what came next. Krell's fleet arrived at Umbera as a Confederacy diplomatic delegation was concluding negotiations. The delegation was led by Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo, now Queen for life after constitutional amendments, accompanied by CIS security forces and several Jedi Covenant advisors, including Kit Fisto. On paper, both parties had legitimate reasons to be there. The Republic claiming security concerns, the Confederacy pursuing diplomatic alliance. In reality, Palpatine had engineered a collision designed to start the war he needed. Krell received an encrypted transmission with 2 words: execute Operation False Light. Republic Special Forces, operating under Krell's direct command, had infiltrated Umbera days earlier. They'd captured several low-level Confederate intelligence operatives and prepared a false flag operation with surgical precision. Republic agents donned captured Confederate armor and markings. The actual Confederate prisoners were forced into Republic clone uniforms. The Confederate forces staged an attack on Republic clone positions while holocams recorded everything. The plan was simple: create footage showing Confederates murdering Republic soldiers, broadcast it across the HoloNet, and justify immediate military response. What Palpatine hadn't accounted for was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan had been assigned to the same mission, officially as diplomatic liaison, unofficially to observe Krell's methods and report back to Mace. When he witnessed Republic Special Forces preparing Confederate prisoners in clone armor, his investigation instincts screamed warnings. "General Krell," Obi-Wan said carefully, approaching the Basilisk in a secure staging area. "What exactly are these prisoners being prepared for?" "Classified operation, General Kenobi. Chancellor's orders. You're not cleared for details. I'm a Jedi General with equal rank. Either you explain, or I contact the Council directly." Krell's forearms tensed. The Chancellor wants definitive proof of Confederate aggression. Sometimes proof needs assistance. Understanding crashed through Obi-Wan like ice water. "You're staging an attack, using prisoners as props. That's not intelligence gathering. That's murder disguised as military operation. That's what war requires," Krell replied coldly. "And if you can't stomach what's necessary to win, perhaps you should have joined Dooku's traitors." Obi-Wan's lightsaber ignited before he consciously decided to draw it. "I won't let you do this." Krell's forearms activated for lightsabers simultaneously. "Then you've chosen treason." The duel was brief and brutal. Krell fought with overwhelming aggression, for blades creating a whirlwind of violence that forced Obi-Wan into pure defense. The Basilisk was physically stronger, tactically ruthless, and utterly committed to his mission. But Obi-Wan had spent 3 years investigating corruption while maintaining Jedi principles. He'd learned to fight while questioning, to defend while analyzing, to survive while holding onto the light side, even when surrounded by darkness. He disarmed Krell, literally, cutting through one of the Basilisk's lightsabers and forcing him back, then transmitted everything he'd witnessed on open Republic military channels. "All Republic forces, this is General Kenobi. Operation on Umbera is a false flag attack. Repeat, false flag. Confederate prisoners being executed in Republic uniforms to manufacture casus belli. General Krell is acting under direct orders to stage atrocity and blame Separatists." Clone Commander Cody, monitoring from a nearby position, heard the transmission and immediately ordered his forces to stand down. "General Kenobi is right. Those aren't Confederate soldiers. They're prisoners in uniform. Sir, we can't participate in this." Krell, realizing the operation was compromised, made a decision that would haunt military history. He fled, transmitting a partial, edited recording to the HoloNet before Obi-Wan could stop him. The footage showed Republic clones under attack, showed bodies in clone armor, showed what appeared to be Confederate forces retreating. It didn't show the preparation, the prisoner execution, the staging. And it went viral across the galaxy within minutes. Republic media networks broadcasted the footage with outrage. Confederate forces ambush Republic peacekeepers on neutral world. Jedi General Kenobi defects mid-operation, attacks loyal commander, allows enemy escape. Confederacy media told a different story. Republic stages false flag attack. Jedi General exposes operation. Joins Confederacy to prevent war crime. Evidence of Republic's willingness to murder prisoners and blame CS. The truth became irrelevant. What mattered was that each side now had its narrative, its justification, its reason to militarize fully. The Cold War that had simmered for 3 years ignited. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in a CAS command center on Umbera, surrounded by former Republic clones who'd followed him after he exposed Krell's operation, Confederate officials who'd just witnessed the Republic attempt to frame them for murder, and Jedi Covenant members who'd spent 3 years warning this would happen. Kit Fisto placed a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome to the light side of the schism, Obi-Wan." "I didn't defect because I wanted to," Obi-Wan said quietly. "I defected because staying would have made me complicit in war crimes." "That's the same reason we left," Shaak Ti replied. "Principle over politics. Conscience over convenience. You made the right choice, even if it cost you everything." "It cost the galaxy everything," Obi-Wan corrected, watching holographic displays showing military deployments across both sides. "War's coming. Real war. And Palpatine just got exactly what he wanted." Dooku entered the command center with Anakin and Padme, his expression grim. "Then we fight it. Not because we wanna, but because refusing to resist evil is complicity. The Republic has become an empire in all but name, led by a Sith Lord, using slave soldiers to enforce its will. We fight because there's no other ethical option left." "Master Dooku," Obi-Wan said formally, "I owe you an apology. You were right. About Palpatine, about the Republic's corruption, about the Jedi's blindness. I'm sorry we didn't listen 3 years ago." "Apology accepted," Dooku replied. "Now let's ensure your integrity cost you your old life, but gave you a new purpose. Welcome to the Confederacy, General Kenobi. Welcome to the war we tried to prevent." As military forces mobilized across the galaxy, as clone armies prepared to march against volunteer militia, as Jedi prepared to face Jedi across battlefields neither side wanted, one truth became unavoidable. The Clone Wars had begun, but this time, the Jedi who served the light weren't all on the same side. And Palpatine's perfect plan had just developed its first genuine complication. He'd intended to control both armies through manipulation. Now one side was led by Jedi who knew exactly what he was and were actively working to expose him. The war that shouldn't be. The Clone Wars began not with a grand battle, but with a series of border skirmishes that neither side officially acknowledged as war. Republic fleets restoring order to systems that had fallen under Separatist influence. Confederate forces defending sovereign worlds from Republic aggression. The propaganda machines on both sides worked overtime, but the reality on the ground was far messier than either government's narrative suggested. On the jungle world of Felucia, Republic clone battalions advanced through fungal forests glowing with bioluminescence, expecting to face droid armies like the intelligence briefings had suggested. Instead, they encountered volunteer militia forces, farmers, miners, laborers who'd been trained by Romkoda to fight with discipline and coordination that rivaled clone effectiveness. The clones had been engineered for war. The militia had chosen it, and that choice made them more dangerous than any droid. Clone Commander Cody, who'd followed Obi-Wan's example and defected after Umbera, now led Confederate defensive operations on Felucia. He understood clone tactics because he'd been designed to execute them. But he also understood something the Republic commanders didn't. Soldiers fighting for their homes were willing to die in ways no programming could replicate. "They're not retreating," a Republic clone reported to his Jedi general, confusion evident in his voice. "We destroyed their forward positions, but they're not falling back. They're digging in deeper." The general, a young knight who'd remained loyal to the Republic out of genuine belief in its mission, studied the tactical display with growing unease. "That's not standard military doctrine. They should be withdrawing to defensible positions." "Maybe they're not following standard doctrine," the clone suggested. "Maybe they're just defending their planet." The observation, simple as it was, cut through layers of Republic propaganda. These weren't separatist aggressors. They were people refusing to abandon their world to an occupying force that claimed to be liberating them. The battle for Felucia dragged on for 3 months, turning into a guerrilla war that consumed clone battalions faster than Kamino could replace them. The jungle swallowed entire companies. Confederate tunnel networks allowed defenders to appear and disappear like ghosts. And every time Republic forces thought they'd secured a sector, ambushes proved them wrong. On other worlds, the conflict took different forms. Praetlin and Bawa became trench wars, miles of fortifications stretching across continents. artillery batteries pounding positions day and night, soldiers on both sides charging across no man's lands for gains measured in meters rather than kilometers. The Confederate militia couldn't match clone precision, but they had numbers and motivation. The Republic couldn't break through defensive lines without casualties that were becoming politically unsustainable. In space, the naval war settled into a pattern of hit-and-run raids and strategic positioning. The Republic had more ships, better technology, and the industrial capacity to replace losses. The Confederacy had defensive advantages, interior supply lines, and commanders willing to trade territory for time while they built their forces. But the most painful aspect of the war wasn't the battles. It was the Jedi. On the desert world of Selakami, two Jedi faced each other across a narrow canyon while armies prepared to clash below them. Mace Windu stood at the head of a Republic clone column, purple lightsaber ignited, representing everything the Jedi Order had become. Militarized, compromised, loyal to institutions rather than principles. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood with Confederate militia forces, blue blade steady, representing everything the Jedi Order should have been. Independent, principled, willing to challenge authority when authority was wrong. "You don't have to do this," Mace called across the distance. "Stand down, Obi-Wan. Come back to the Order. We can find a political solution that doesn't require brothers fighting brothers." "I tried political solutions for 3 years," Obi-Wan replied, his voice carrying across the canyon. "I investigated Palpatine, found evidence, brought it to you personally, and you chose to serve him anyway while gathering more proof instead of acting on what we already knew. Because acting prematurely would have triggered the exact civil war we're fighting now." The Civil War started the moment the Republic accepted a slave army and positioned Jedi as military commanders. We're just making it visible instead of pretending everything's fine. For a moment, neither Jedi moved. The armies below waited, watching their commanders, wondering if this war would actually require them to kill the peacekeepers they'd spent lifetimes respecting. Then Mace charged. The duel was technically brilliant and emotionally devastating. These were two Jedi masters who'd fought side by side for decades, who trained the same students, who defended the galaxy from threats neither could have handled alone. Now, they met with lethal intent, their blades creating arcs of light across the canyon that made soldiers on both sides forget to breathe. Mace fought with Vapad's controlled aggression, channeling his frustration and anger into precise strikes meant to overwhelm. But Obi-Wan had spent 3 years learning from Dooku, understanding that Surisu wasn't just defense, it was patience. The willingness to outlast aggression until aggression exhausted itself. The duel lasted 7 minutes and ended in stalemate. Neither Jedi could gain advantage. Neither could land a killing blow. And neither, despite everything, could bring themselves to actually kill a brother. They disengaged by mutual unspoken agreement, backing away from each other with sabers still ignited, and the armies below watched two legends prove that some bond survived even war. "This isn't over," Mace said, breathing hard. "I know," Obi-Wan replied, "but I hope when it is, we'll be on the same side again." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Kit Fisto faced CC Tyen on Mon Calamari and chose to withdraw rather than kill a former colleague. PLO Kun debated philosophy with Kiadi-Mundi mid-battle on Cato Neimoidia, their argument continuing even as their armies clashed. Shakti encountered Aayla Secura, who'd rejoined the Republic after soul-searching, and their duel ended with both in tears, unable to strike the final blow. The Jedi Civil War was being fought with restraint that would have been impossible in any other conflict, which made it somehow worse, because it meant both sides understood they were destroying each other for reasons neither fully believed in anymore. 18-year-old Anakin Skywalker had become something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations. A Jedi who understood both military strategy and political reality, who could fight without losing himself to violence, who led militia forces with the kind of tactical genius that came from being trained by Dooku in philosophy, Coda in warfare, and Padme in diplomacy. He stood in a Confederate command center on Christophsis, studying holographic battle displays with the same intensity he'd once brought to pod racer engines. Republic forces are concentrating around our shield generator, Roncoda pointed out, his gruff voice carrying military pragmatism Anakin had learned to respect. They're not trying to break through, they're preparing a siege. Starve us out. Then we don't let them complete the siege, Anakin replied, manipulating the holo display to show terrain features. These crystal formations create natural corridors. We use them for hit-and-run attacks, disrupt their supply lines, force them to spread their forces defending against raids instead of concentrating on siege operations. Guerrilla tactics against clone precision, Coda said approvingly. I like it, but we'll need someone who understands how clones think to coordinate the operation effectively. I know just the person, Anakin said, opening a comm channel. Commander Rex, this is General Skywalker. I'm sending you tactical coordinates. Think you can help us make the Republic's siege impossible to maintain? Clone Captain Rex, one of the growing number of clones who defected after witnessing Republic war crimes, appeared via hologram, his armor now bearing Confederate colors instead of Republic white. If it means fewer of my brothers dying for a Sith Lord's war, I'll help with anything, General. The operation was textbook Coda, precise, brutal, and effective. Small teams of militia soldiers guided by defected clones struck supply convoys, communication relays, and forward operating bases. The Republic forces found themselves defending a perimeter that grew larger and more vulnerable with each passing day, their siege turning into a defensive posture that cost more resources than it was worth. Eventually, the Republic withdrew, declaring Christophsis strategically insignificant, while internal reports admitted they simply couldn't afford the casualties required to take it. Anakin's reputation grew with each successful defense. But what interested observers most wasn't his tactical skill, it was his restraint. He gave captured Republic soldiers the choice to defect or return home. He refused to target civilian infrastructure even when military necessity suggested it. And he explicitly ordered his forces to avoid killing Jedi whenever possible, treating them as misguided brothers rather than enemies. It was the kind of leadership that made people follow him not because they had to, but because they believed in what he represented. Padme, watching from Naboo, where she coordinated diplomatic efforts while managing her role as queen, saw something that simultaneously thrilled and terrified her. Anakin was becoming the leader the galaxy needed. But she also knew that Palpatine would recognize him as a threat. Chancellor Palpatine stood in his private office, reviewing battlefield reports that showed a war not unfolding according to plan. The Clone Wars were supposed to be orchestrated, both sides controlled through manipulation, battles scripted to achieve specific political outcomes, casualties calibrated to justify ever-increasing emergency powers. Instead, he faced genuine military opposition led by Jedi who knew what he was and were actively working to expose him. The Confederacy's propaganda is proving effective, his advisor reported nervously. Public opinion in neutral systems increasingly favors them. The image of volunteer militia defending homes against clone armies is problematic for our narrative. Then change the narrative, Palpatine replied with Sith calm. Increase military pressure on Confederate worlds. Authorize orbital bombardments if necessary. Make it clear that opposition to the Republic carries consequences. Supreme Chancellor, such measures would violate. Would violate what? Peacetime conventions during wartime? The Confederacy chose rebellion. They faced rebel consequences. But even as he gave those orders, Palpatine recognized the growing problem. The longer the war lasted without clear Republic victory, the more questions people would ask about why they were fighting. And questions led to investigations. Investigations led to evidence. Evidence led to exposure. He needed a decisive blow. Something that would shift momentum, demonstrate Republic strength, and remind the galaxy that opposing Coruscant carried fatal consequences. He needed Coruscant attacked, not seriously, not enough to actually threaten the capital, but enough to justify extreme measures in response. Enough to make the Confederacy look like aggressors rather than defenders. enough to allow him to declare martial law and begin consolidating the dictatorial powers he'd been building toward for decades. The plan formed with Sith precision: leak intelligence about a Republic superweapon facility on Coruscant, make it credible enough that the Confederacy would feel compelled to investigate, coordinate the leak through channels that would reach Dooku specifically when the Confederacy attacked, and they would because their intelligence network was good enough to verify the facility existed. He'd have his justification. He transmitted orders to his most loyal agents: prepare Operation Nightfall. When Confederate forces reach Coruscant, activate Order 66. Target all Jedi, Republic and Separatist. Let them destroy each other in the confusion, and we'll build the Empire from the ashes. The leaked intelligence reached Confederate command through 3 separate channels, each appearing independent, but all containing the same core information. Republic was developing a superweapon capable of sterilizing entire planets, hidden in a classified facility beneath Coruscant's industrial sector. Dooku studied the reports with the suspicion of someone who'd spent 3 years being proven right about conspiracies. "It's too convenient," Obi-Wan said, standing in a war room aboard a Confederate flagship. Intelligence this specific from multiple sources, all pointing to the one target that would justify Palpatine declaring martial law. "Agreed," Dooku replied, "but we can't ignore it if there's even a chance it's genuine. A weapon that can destroy planets would shift the war's balance catastrophically. Then we verify before we act," PLO Kuhn suggested. "Send reconnaissance forces, gather hard evidence, then decide whether military action is warranted." Before they could continue the debate, a holographic transmission appeared, one that shocked everyone in the room because it came from someone who shouldn't have been contacting them at all. Yoda materialized, his ancient form unmistakable even in flickering blue light. "Master Yoda." Mace Windu's voice came through a separate channel, fury evident even through the comlink. "You're transmitting to Confederate command. That's treason." "Treason against what?" Yoda replied with the bluntness of someone 900 years old and done with political games. "Against the Republic? Or against a Sith Lord pretending to serve it? Spoken with the Force, I have. Clear its guidance is. Together, work we must. Expose Palpatine we must. We're consumed by darkness. The galaxy will be." "You're asking me to trust Separatists," Mace said, but his voice carried less conviction than it would have months earlier. "Asking you to trust the Force, I am. And trust Jedi who saw truth before blindness claimed us all. Wrong we were. Right Dooku was. Accept this we must. Or repeat our mistakes, we will." The transmission cut, leaving the Confederate command room in stunned silence. "Yoda's defection will break the Republic Jedi," Shakti said quietly. He was the last anchor holding them to the Order's identity. "If he's joined us, then Mace will be forced to choose," Dooku finished. "Between loyalty to Yoda and loyalty to the Republic. Between the Force and Palpatine. We need to contact Mace directly," Obi-Wan urged. "Tell him what we know. Give him the evidence we've gathered. Force him to see that serving Palpatine is serving the Sith." "He already knows," Anakin said, speaking for the first time since Yoda's transmission. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 3 years learning to read people from Padme's diplomatic training. "He's known for months, maybe years. He's just been trying to prove it definitively before acting. But waiting for perfect proof while serving evil is still serving evil. Then we force the issue," Dooku decided. "We do what Palpatine expects, assault Coruscant, but not to destroy a weapon facility. To capture him, alive, on camera, and broadcast his trial to the entire galaxy." "That's insane," Koda said bluntly. "Coruscant is the most heavily defended system in Republic space. Even with Yoda's defection, we'd be outnumbered 5-1. "Then we don't fight their army," Anakin replied, his tactical mind already working through the problem. "We slip past it. Small strike force, surgical insertion, capture operation while the main fleet provides distraction. Get in, grab Palpatine, get out before they can organize response." "And if Mace defends him?" PLO Kuhn asked. "Then we face our brother," Obi-Wan said heavily. and pray we can make him see reason before anyone has to die. The plan was desperate, dangerous, and depended on perfect execution with minimal margin for error. It required trusting that Yoda's defection would fracture Republic Jedi enough to create openings. It assumed Mace's loyalty to the Order would overcome his loyalty to the Republic. It gambled that Palpatine's arrogance would blind him to the possibility that the Confederacy understood his trap and was walking into it deliberately. But it was the only path forward that ended with exposure rather than endless war. Prepare the fleet, Dooku commanded. Alert all Jedi Covenant members. Contact clone defector units. And someone sent a message to Mace Windu. Tell him that if he ever wants to serve the light side again, he'll stand aside when we come for Palpatine. As Confederate forces mobilized for the most audacious operation of the war, Palpatine sat in his office on Coruscant, sensing through the Force that events were accelerating toward the moment he'd been engineering for decades. Order 66 was ready. Clone battalions had been positioned strategically across the galaxy. And when Confederate forces arrived at Coruscant, when Jedi from both sides converged on the capital, he would activate the protocol that would eliminate them all simultaneously. The Jedi had been blind for 1,000 years. They would die still blind, never realizing that their civil war had been exactly what he'd wanted. Or so he believed. What Palpatine couldn't sense, what no Sith had ever understood, was that the light side of the Force had its own plans. And sometimes, the greatest victories came not from manipulation, but from Jedi who'd remembered what being a Jedi actually meant. The fall of shadows, final. The Confederate fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Coruscant's defensive grid with surgical precision. Not the massive armada that would signal conquest, but a strike force calculated to appear desperate enough to be believable while being small enough to penetrate defenses before Republic forces could fully mobilize. Yoda's flagship led the formation, broadcasting Jedi identification codes that sent immediate confusion through Republic command. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order, leading a separatist assault on the galactic capital, represented a psychological blow that paralyzed defensive coordination for exactly the seconds Coda's battle plan required. All Republic forces, this is Grandmaster Yoda, the ancient Jedi's voice transmitted across every military frequency. Not conquest we seek, not destruction, justice. The Chancellor, Darth Sidious he is. Expose him we must. Stand aside, you should. Or defend a Sith Lord, you will. On the surface in the Jedi Temple, Mace Windu heard that transmission and felt something break inside him. Not his loyalty, but the cognitive dissonance that had been tearing him apart for months. Yoda didn't make mistakes about the dark side. If Yoda had defected to expose Palpatine, then everything Obi-Wan had been saying for years was true. Master Windu, a young Jedi Knight, approached nervously. Republic Command is ordering all Jedi to defensive positions. Confederate forces are breaking through the outer grid. Mace stared at the holographic tactical display, watching Confederate ships execute Coda's signature feint and breakthrough pattern. A strategy designed to draw defenders to the wrong positions while the real assault force slipped through gaps in coverage. Sir, your orders. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Defend Palpatine, or trust Yoda. Serve the Republic, or serve the Force. Maintain institutional loyalty, or embrace the truth he'd been avoiding for years. Get every Jedi in the temple to the emergency assembly hall. Mace ordered, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would define the Order's future. Now, and tell Republic Command that the Jedi are standing down pending clarification of the situation. That's treason, Master. No, must reply quietly. It's finally doing what we should have done 3 years ago. Anakin Skywalker led the ground assault team. 5 Jedi, 20 elite Confederate commandos, and a dozen defected clone troopers who knew exactly how Republic forces would respond because they'd been trained to execute those responses. They inserted via stealth shuttle through Coruscant's labyrinthine lower levels, avoiding orbital defenses entirely by entering through a maintenance vector that shouldn't have been navigable, but was if you had detailed schematics provided by former Republic engineers who joined the Confederacy specifically to help operations like this. Obi-Wan moved beside Anakin, the two Jedi representing different generations of the same principle: conscience over convenience, truth over comfort, justice over institutional loyalty. You realize this is either the most brilliant plan in military history or the most catastrophic mistake, Obi-Wan muttered as they navigated through industrial sectors that stretched kilometers beneath the Senate district. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Anakin replied, his tactical awareness scanning for threats with the hypervigilance Dooku had trained into him. Every brilliant plan is one variable away from catastrophic mistake. That's what makes it brilliant. Kit Fisto chuckled from behind them. "Dooku's taught you well." That's exactly the kind of aristocratic fatalism he'd express. The infiltration proceeded with disturbing ease. No resistance, no security patrols, no indication that Coruscant's defenders even knew they were there, which meant either the distractions were working perfectly or Palpatine knew they were coming and was allowing it. "I don't like this," PLO Kuhn said, his mask-filtered voice carrying warning. "The Force feels wrong, like we're walking into something prepared specifically for us." "We are." Dooku's voice crackled over their comlinks from the flagship above. "Palpatine knows we're coming. He's allowed it, which means he has a contingency that he believes will eliminate us regardless of whether we reach him." Reassuring, Obi-Wan muttered, "I didn't say we'd avoid the trap. I said we'd spring at knowing it's a trap, which gives us advantage over walking into it blind." They emerged into the Senate district's subterranean infrastructure just as Republic forces finally organized a coherent defensive response. Clone battalions deployed across strategic choke points, establishing firing lines designed to channel attackers into kill zones. But these defenders weren't facing droid armies that charged predictably. They were facing Jedi who understood Republic tactics and former clones who'd helped design them. "Rex," Anakin transmitted to the defected clone captain coordinating the ground assault. "What's the standard Republic defense pattern for Senate District underground infiltration?" "Establish overlapping fields of fire at major access points. Leave secondary corridors lightly defended as apparent escape routes that are actually channeling attackers toward prepared positions," Rex replied immediately. "Then collapse the corridor behind them and eliminate with concentrated fire. So we avoid the primary corridors entirely, use the secondary passages that aren't actually traps, and come up behind their main defensive line instead of through it." That shouldn't work. Those passages are structurally unsafe, haven't been maintained in decades, and might collapse if more than two people traverse them simultaneously. "Good thing we're not planning to be subtle," Anakin said, igniting his lightsaber and cutting through a wall that separated the safe corridor from the unsafe one. "Move fast, stay light, and get through before they realize we're not where they expect us." The maneuver worked because it was exactly the kind of reckless, tactical genius that no standard military doctrine would consider viable. Within minutes, the Confederate team emerged behind Republic defensive lines, forcing clone commanders to reposition forces that had been perfectly deployed for an attack that never came from the expected direction. "This is why I hate fighting Jedi," a clone commander muttered before ordering his troops to fall back to secondary positions. "They don't follow proper military doctrine because they don't have to." The Senate building itself was eerily empty. Senators had been evacuated once the Confederate fleet appeared, leaving only security forces and the one person who'd refused to evacuate despite every protocol demanding it. Supreme Chancellor Palpatine stood in his office, looking out over Coruscant's cityscape with the calm satisfaction of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Behind him, Mace Windu entered, lightsaber in hand but not yet ignited. "Chancellor," Mace said quietly, "I'm here to place you under arrest for treason against the Republic and suspected collaboration with Sith interests." Palpatine turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to disappointment with theatrical precision. "Master Windu, after all your years of loyal service, you're siding with traitors and separatists?" Because Dooku spreads conspiracy theories and Yoda's judgment fails in his old age. Because I've investigated you for 3 years and found evidence that you're Darth Sidious. Because the Force itself screams warnings about the darkness surrounding you. Because every Jedi who left the Order warned us about this exact scenario, and we were too invested in institutional loyalty to listen. And you have proof, enough to justify arrest pending investigation. The Senate. The Senate. Palpatine's voice dropped, losing its grandfatherly warmth entirely. The Senate will do whatever I tell them to do. I am the Senate. And you, Master Windu, are about to learn what happens when Jedi forget their place. His hands moved, Force lightning erupting with Sith fury that illuminated the office in crackling blue-white energy. Mace's lightsaber ignited instantly, purple blade intercepting the lightning in a shower of sparks that lit both their faces with harsh shadows. For 5 seconds they held that position, Sith Lord and Jedi Master, lightning against plasma, darkness against light. Then Mace advanced, turning the lightning aside with Vapad's unique ability to channel darkness back at its source. The duel exploded into motion. Palpatine moved with speed that should have been impossible, his red lightsaber appearing from nowhere, strikes coming from angles that violated spatial geometry. This was a Sith Lord who'd spent decades hiding his true power, and now that the mask was off, his full capabilities were terrifying. Mace matched him through sheer mastery of Vapad. His blade work perfect, his aggression controlled, his ability to channel Palpatine's own darkness back through his lightsaber, making him one of the few Jedi who could face a Sith Lord in single combat without being overwhelmed. But Mace had just fought the psychological battle of his life, choosing to arrest Palpatine. His certainty was absolute, but his strength was already taxed by the emotional weight of betraying the institution he'd served. Palpatine sensed that weakness and pressed harder. For corridors away, Anakin's team encountered their first real resistance. Temple guards who'd remained loyal to the Republic, blocking access to the Chancellor's office with a disciplined silence that made them more intimidating than verbal threats. "We don't want to fight you," Obi-Wan said, his diplomatic instincts engaging even mid-combat infiltration. "We're here to arrest a Sith Lord, not attack the Jedi Order." The guards responded by igniting their lightsaber pikes and attacking in perfect coordination. The battle was brutal and heartbreaking. These were Jedi fighting Jedi, former allies forced into opposition by institutional divisions neither side had wanted. Anakin fought defensively, disarming rather than killing, using the superior mobility Dooku had trained into him to stay ahead of pike strikes designed to keep opponents at distance. Kit Fisto's water-adapted fighting style confused opponents who trained against conventional Jedi forms. Plo Koon's pragmatic combat philosophy focused on ending fights quickly with minimal injury to either side. And Obi-Wan Sarisu made him nearly untouchable, his defense so perfect that guards exhausted themselves trying to break through. But they were running out of time. Dooku, Anakin transmitted upward, were pinned down by temple guards. "Need extraction support or alternative route to Chancellor's office?" "Extraction coming," Dooku replied, and his voice carried the grim satisfaction of someone who'd just made a decision that would haunt him. But it's not what you're expecting. The ceiling exploded inward as a Republic gunship crashed through, piloted by clones who defected after hearing Yoda's transmission. The guards scattered from the debris, and Rex's voice crackled over comms. "Your ride's here, General. But we've got a problem. Palpatine's transmitting something on all clone command frequencies. Some kind of activation code." "What code?" "Order 66. The galaxy seemed to stop moving." Order 66. The biological programming buried in every clone soldier's neural structure. The ultimate contingency that would turn the clone army against their Jedi commanders in a single instant. If Palpatine had just activated it, then every clone battalion across the galaxy was currently turning on the Jedi who'd been leading them. But these clones were different. "It's trying to activate," Rex said, his voice strained with the effort of fighting his own programming. "I can feel the compulsion, but it's not working right. We've been serving with Jedi voluntarily for years, built actual relationships, chose to be here. The programming can't override genuine loyalty. Not every clone was so fortunate. Across Coruscant, some clone units turned on Jedi generals who'd remained loyal to the Republic, executing commanders who'd led them through countless battles. But the percentage was far lower than Palpatine had designed. Maybe 30% followed the programming immediately, another 40% fought it with varying degrees of success, and 30% refused outright. The Order 66, that should have been perfect genocide, instead became chaos. In the Jedi Temple, Mace's emergency assembly had just concluded when the first reports arrived. Clone battalions across the galaxy were attacking Jedi. Transmissions were cut off mid-scream, and temples on a dozen worlds had gone dark. Order 66, a Jedi Knight whispered, horror dawning. It's happening. The Chancellor activated Order 66. Then we respond. Mace said his certainty absolute now that Palpatine had revealed himself completely. All Jedi, emergency evacuation protocols. Get Padawans to transports. Anyone who can fight with me. We're ending this. 500 Jedi mobilized in minutes. Not all of the Order, but enough to represent the full might of a tradition that had survived 1,000 years of challenges. They marched on the Senate district like an army of light. Anakin's team burst into Palpatine's office, just as Mace was forced to one knee. Palpatine's lightning overwhelming even Vappad's defensive capabilities. Master Windu, Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber and stepped forward, blade intercepting the lightning stream and dividing Palpatine's attention between two opponents. Palpatine snarled, spinning to face this new threat, and in that moment of distraction, Anakin struck. Not with his lightsaber, but with the Force, a telekinetic blast that sent the Sith Lord crashing into the window behind his desk hard enough to crack the transparent steel. You're outmatched, Dooku's voice announced as the Count entered with Yoda at his side. Both of their lightsabers ignited. 4 Jedi Masters, 2 Knights, and an army of light marching through your Senate building. Surrender, Sidious. Your war is over. Palpatine rose slowly, his face twisted into something monstrous, yellow eyes blazing with Sith fury that had been hidden for decades. You think you've won? Order 66 is active. Your precious Jedi are dying across the galaxy. And even if you kill me here, the empire I've built will endure. Will it? Yoda interrupted, his ancient voice carrying absolute certainty. Your Order 66 failed a has. Too many clones, personal loyalty they developed. Too many Jedi, prepare they were. Kill us all you cannot. Stop you we will. And trial you face shall broadcast across the galaxy. See the Sith Lord who orchestrated this war. Everyone will. Then you'll have to take me, Palpatine hissed, gathering power for a final desperate strike. The explosion of Force energy that followed was visible from orbit. Sith lightning meeting Jedi defense. 7 blades converging on one. Darkness facing light in the most literal sense possible. The duel lasted 30 seconds. Palpatine was one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history, a master of manipulation and dark side combat, who'd spent decades preparing for this exact confrontation. But he prepared for a divided Jedi Order, for opponents he controlled through fear and institutional loyalty, for a war where he held every advantage. He hadn't prepared for Jedi who'd left the Order to follow conscience, who'd spent 3 years building a coalition specifically to expose him, who'd recognized his manipulation and chosen truth over comfort. Dooku's blade struck from a left, elegant and precise. Mace's purple saber came from the right, Vappad channeling Palpatine's own darkness against him. Obi-Wan's defensive perfection negated lightning attacks. And Yoda, 900 years of wisdom and light side mastery, pressed forward with strikes that made Palpatine retreat for the first time in decades. The killing blow came from the least expected source. Anakin Skywalker, who'd been trained by a Jedi who understood that the dark side's greatest weakness was overconfidence. While Palpatine focused on the master surrounding him, Anakin circled behind, moving with the tactical genius Yoda had trained, and drove his blade through the Sith Lord's torso in a strike that was efficient, clean, and final. Palpatine collapsed, yellow eyes widening in disbelief that after all his planning, all his manipulation, all his decades of careful engineering, he'd been killed by a slave boy from Tatooine who'd been trained by the very Jedi whose fall he'd been counting on. Impossible. Palpatine whispered, dark side energy dissipating as death claimed him. I controlled everything. You controlled nothing, Dooku replied quietly. You manipulated institutions and exploited weakness. But you never understood that some people can't be controlled. Not through fear, not through power, not through anything except their own choices. And we chose to stop you. The Sith Lord who nearly destroyed the galaxy died on the floor of his own office, his grand design shattered by the exact variable he'd been too arrogant to account for. Jedi who remembered what being a Jedi meant. The death of Darth Sidious, transmitted live across the HoloNet, broadcast by Confederacy forces to every system in the galaxy, ended the Clone Wars in a way nobody had anticipated. Not through military conquest, not through treaty negotiations, but through exposure. The galaxy watched Jedi from both Republic and Confederacy standing together over Palpatine's body, watched evidence being presented of decades of Sith manipulation, watched the recordings Dooku had made 3 years earlier finally being shared publicly. And they realized that the war consuming millions of lives had been orchestrated by a Sith Lord who'd controlled both sides for his own benefit. The Republic didn't collapse immediately, but it changed. Emergency powers were rescinded. The clone army was disbanded, not destroyed, but given the choice to serve as citizens rather than property. Many chose military careers voluntarily. Many more chose civilian life, finally free to be people rather than soldiers. The Jedi Order never fully recovered from its fracture. The temple remained on Coruscant, but it was smaller, humbler, more focused on actual peacekeeping than institutional preservation. The Jedi Covenant continued operating independently from the Confederacy, which itself evolved from emergency war coalition to legitimate alternative government, representing 37 worlds that preferred sovereignty over Republic membership. The galaxy stabilized into a two-power system, the Reformed Republic and the Confederacy, that would argue, compete, and occasionally threaten war, but never quite return to the orchestrated horror that Palpatine had engineered. Some historians argued the cost was too high. Millions dead, the Jedi divided, democracy compromised. Others argued it was necessary, that exposing corruption required trauma, that preventing Sith Empire justified the sacrifice. Most agreed on one fact. If Count Dooku had fallen to the dark side as Palpatine intended, the galaxy would have been doomed. Instead, by refusing the dark while still rejecting the Republic's corruption, by training Anakin as a person rather than a weapon, by building a coalition based on principle rather than power, Dooku had done something almost impossible. He'd beaten a Sith Lord at his own game. And 20 years later, when Master Skywalker stood with his wife, Queen Amidala, on Naboo, training a new generation of Jedi who understood that attachment wasn't weakness and choice mattered more than destiny, he remembered the lesson Dooku had taught him in that temple corridor so many years ago. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust yourself instead of following orders. Sometimes principle costs everything. And sometimes the galaxy is saved by people who refuse to compromise even when compromise seems easier. The Sith had worked from shadows for 1,000 years. On Coruscant, in the light of truth, that shadow finally ended. This is Star Wars Galaxy. Feel free to suggest crossover titles in the comments below.
Wow, this timeline gets deeper more than you could have imagined. Because the real shock isn't that Count Dooku stayed in the light, it's that one Jedi choosing truth over blind loyalty slowly started waking everybody else up too. Obi-Wan Kenobi questioning the Republic, clone troopers resisting programming, even the Jedi finally realizing the war had already corrupted them long before they noticed. And honestly, that makes this crossover more dangerous than a normal Sith rebellion.